So we looked at different ways to send data to the browser via send and JSON and whatnot. But the one that we're going to be using quite a bit when we're not dealing with API endpoints is something called res.render. So response.render. And what that will do is it's going to render out a template for us. So this video is going to be all about learning how to use our templating language called Pug. Now, first things first, Pug is a templating language that is very popular in the Node community. It used to be called Jade. So if you're ever looking for help on this stuff, it could be helpful to search for Jade. They recently switched the name over because of some legal reasons. So Jade is our templating engine, and you can look in app.js on around line 20 and 21. And what that's going to show you is that, first of all, we have what's called a views folder. And the views folder is where all of our Pug files are going to live. So anytime we need to create a template, that goes inside of our views folder, and that's determined right here. Next, we set our view engine to be Pug. However, there are other alternatives if you do not prefer. There's Pug is based on indentation, which some people absolutely love. Some people just can't deal with it at all. So there's other templating engines called Mustache and EJS if you prefer either of those as well. You could even do this entire tutorial in a different templating engine if you already know that. You would just switch that out here at that moment. Now, that's fine. So we can close down app.js. Then we go to let's go to our first route here, router.get /. How we can then render out a template is not request response.json, but it's response.render. And response.render is going to take two things. First, it needs the name of a template to render out. So we need to make one. So let's go to our views directory here, and I'm going to make a new file. Let's just call that hello.pug. And then we can write inside of Pug. Now, we're going to go over all the different pieces of Pug, but let's just get it working. And how Pug works is that you do not give yourself tags like a open paragraph, close paragraph, hello, close it. You simply just give it the opening tag that you wish to have, and then you type your content inside of it. So we'll go over a little bit more, but that's our very basic getting set up. So we want to render out the hello template. You don't need to put a .pug on the end, so it's just hello. And then the second thing we pass it is some local variables, some information about that it needs. So right now, let's just go without those. We'll render out hello.pug. So let's go back to our application, get that working, and you should see hello being rendered out to the page. Okay, so that seems simple enough. We've got our hello.pug. It's going to be turned into regular HTML. If you inspect it, you can see exactly what's going on here. We got a paragraph tag. And then the HTML, the head, the body, all of that stuff is just there because if the browser does not receive any of it, it will insert it in there for us. So let's go through some of our basics when dealing with Pug. First thing that we need to know is that you have a tag, a space, and then you have all of your elements inside of it. If you wish to nest your elements, like let's say you have a div, and inside of that you want a paragraph, you need to indent it one level. And this is really important because I know that some people, when they're first getting started with coding, they're a little bit sloppy with their indentation practices, and this is going to force you to get really good at your indentation. So first thing you need to do is to pick your indentation standard. I use 2 spaces. You might use 4. You might use tabs. It doesn't matter as long as you pick one and do not ever stray from it for this entire project. So I'm using 2 spaces. You can see in my editor, I've set that up. And then you simply just nest it inside of it. So I have a div and I have a paragraph, and maybe inside of that, I want a span with yo, give that a save. Now when I refresh, you can inspect this and you can see that we've got all of our different elements here. Close this sucker down. There we go. We got a div, we got a paragraph, we got a span. They will be turned on over. Now, what if we want classes on it, like a wrapper? So we can say div.wrapper. And if you want a class on the paragraph with hello, and then if you want an ID, use pound, just like CSS selectors will be. You say yo. Inside of that, refresh. You see a div with a class of wrapper, class of hello, ID. If you have multiple oh no, it will give it both of those classes as you need. So you can dot, and pound. Another hot tip is if it's just a div, it's assumed. So you do not need, you can simply just type .wrapper in front of it, and it will always give you a div. So if you leave the element type out, it will assume that it is always a div. And then we also need to know about attributes. So let's say I have an image tag here. How do I give it a source? Well, you use parentheses here, and then you can give it all of your attributes that you need. So source equals dog.jpg, and then you do a space, which is alt equals dog. Give that a save. And then here, image source equals alt. I believe you can also do commas in it if you prefer that. Yep, that will work just fine. So if you prefer to do a comma, but I like to keep my syntax as minimal as possible. And you can, of course, mix that with a dog class and have a source in there. So a class of dog, a source of dog.jpg, and alt of dog in there. What else do we need to learn? Obviously, have all of your H2 tags. Hello, all of your headings, all of your HTML works just the same. But if you ever need to nest something inside of another element, you can do that. If you have maybe you have a hello there and then a span that says "How are you?" or maybe emphasis inside of that. That will work just fine. Although if that bugs you a little bit and you wish to put the hello and the how are you on their own line, what you can do is you can put it on its own line. But now what's going to happen if I save that, open up the H2, you'll see that we get a hello tag, which is not what you want. So like, how would you just put the content? Well, you pipe space, and that will give you the actual. So the Pug and the J docs are really good at telling you what is the equivalent. It's a little bit of a learning curve to understand, but we're going to be learning how we do all of the different pieces. We're going to be looking at how do you do looping inside of here? How do you do logic? How do you do advanced templating? How do you do mix-ins? There's a whole bunch that we can do, and we're going to learn it as we go along. But for now, what you need to know is how we create elements and nest them inside of each other. The other thing I want to tell you is how do you get information from your route, which will come from maybe from a database that we're going to do, or comes from your URL. How do you get that information to your actual template? So the way that you do that is you have to pass it when you render. So we pass it an object here, and then that object will contain all of the information that we have. So maybe we say name is Wes, and dog is Snickers. Then you go into here, hello, how are you? And we can reference those variables inside of it. So let's say, hello, my dog's name is. Now, how do we reference it? You do pound curly brackets, and that's how you interpolate a variable inside of text in Pug. And you can simply just say what the name was. So let's say dog. And then, hello, my dog's name is Snickers. And you can make that a little bit dynamic, where you could do query mark dog equals, let's do Hugo. And we could make that dynamic by saying the dog's is, how do you tell me? Request dot query dot dog. So my dog's name is Hugo, Snickers, Wes. You see how it's pulling it in, passing it along to the templating. So whenever you need to get information over to your template, these are called local variables, or locals as they're often called in ExpressLand. That's how we pass it along. And we can do things like dog. Another thing that we need to know is, let's say we wanted to put the dog's name in the alt tag. Previously in Jade, what you would do is you would do pound like that, and you would say dog. But it actually doesn't work. You see that it actually just writes the word. So how do you put variables into attributes? This is how you put variables into text. But they've taken away the ability to put variables into attributes unless you just use JavaScript. So how do you do that in JavaScript? Well, you use backticks instead, and then you use ES6 template literals, which is a $ curly brackets instead of pound. And then that will pass along the dog's name into the alt of the actual image. So that's a little bit funky, because you have to remember that when you're writing text, it's pound. But when you're trying to do an attribute, you have to use backticks and a $. So it's a bit unfortunate, but that's just the way it is. And it doesn't look like it's going to be changed. So it's not the biggest deal in the world, because you can learn these things pretty quickly. Another thing that you need to know is that you can run any JavaScript inside of this. So if you needed to make a quick variable, ideally you do all the work in here. But if you do need to make a variable, you can just use a minus sign, const up dog equals, and you can say dog.to uppercase. And then we can use our up dog variable in there, no problem. And it will uppercase it for us. Similarly, we could also do dog.to uppercase, and that will do exactly the same thing. So you can run JavaScript, and that's really why I like using Pug a lot, because it's JavaScript based. And anytime you need to run some quick JavaScript, whether it's to filter something or whether it's to run a quick uppercase or to split a string, then you can also do that logic right inside of your template. So we're going to be looking deeper at some of the stuff, looping logic, mixins, if statements, all that stuff as we go ahead. But that's the very basics of understanding our Pug. So this is all great, but chances are that you want to chunk your website into different pieces, like a header and a footer and a body tag, and you want to reuse parts of your website over and over again. So how we actually do that is we extend templates, and we sort of create like what I like to call layouts, and then you leave little holes in your layouts for the footer and for the body content and whatnot, and we just pass that in because right now we don't have our, if I were to do exclamation mark tab, and by the way, that little thing, that's Emmet. If you're ever wondering, Emmet works just fine in Jade as well. So you can do things like ul.dogs, li.dog, dog $, and hit tab and then give 10 of them. That will give you all of it. So that's Emmet. If you need it up and running, we've used it in most of my other courses. I recommend that you get it for writing Pug as well. But how do you get like the HTML tag and all that? So if we go into our views directory and we open up layout.pug, you'll see that I've actually set you up with our base HTML. So we have doc type HTML. Here's our HTML tag. We've got our head, and we have a title tag, which means you should pass it a title. Then we also have a helpers. I'll go into that in a second. Link up our style.css and link up our donut for the fav icon. We have our body tag, which inside of it will include what's called a block. And a block is sort of like a section of your website that can be filled in by another template. And so we have our header here, and then we put the content that we wish for it to show if nothing gets passed in. So by default, you probably aren't going to pass a custom header. So we're going to run this header. And this may look like a little bit messy. It may look like a lot right now. We will go into understanding all of this in the future. Don't worry all that much. But if you scroll down, all the way down to where we say dot content, block content. So we have a div with a class of content, and that's where our block content goes. What we can then do is go back to our hello here, and we can, let's just delete absolutely everything that we have in there. We want to extend this layout. We want to like use all of this layout, and then we just want to put our content in this one little piece that we have right here. So that's what we can do. We can say extends layout, and that will extend the layout. And then you go ahead and type all of your blocks. So we have block content, and inside of the content block is now where we type everything we want for it to put into this block right here. So if I say p hello, what it's going to do is it's going to take the paragraph and replace this with p hello for us. So I'll give that a save and refresh. And now you're going to see, whoa, now we've got all of our website showing up. We've got this header that I've already done for you being clicked in. And the hello is the only thing that we've done here. We could also make a block header and pass in a custom header like h1 yo. And what that will do is it will replace, because you'll see in our layout.pug, we have a block header, and then we also have content in front of that. So this will be the default header that we have here. However, if you ever are in a Pug file and you wish to overwrite the default that you have there, you can just specify the block header, and that will, instead of using the default one that we have here, it will replace it with whatever it is that you have passed inside of there. So you could also do that with our content here. We could say like P, this is the default. And if I do not pass anything, it says this is the default. But if we go back to content here and pass in hello, now we start to see hello. So that's what we're going to be doing with all of our templates. We're going to be extending the layout. This is sort of our overall layout for the entire website. So it's not like a WordPress where you have a page where you pull in the pieces that you want. It's more like you grab your layout and then you pass it the data that you want and the pieces that you wish to overwrite. So if I don't have a footer here, but if I wanted to, I would simply just add a footer element here, and we say block footer, and then I would say like something like copyright Wes Boss. Let's see what that does. So it shows up because I put it in my layout.pug. However, I'd be able to then go in here and give ourselves a new block called footer. And maybe I wanted to do something funny like P, I love you. And that's going to overwrite the default that we've got in there. So hopefully that makes sense. We'll be going over that a lot more as we go along, but know that your layout is your overall page layout, and your pug files are simply going to extend that layout by typing extends layout. So we sort of use that layout, and you can feather them in many levels, but generally I just have one layout for my front end. I have one layout if I have like a custom backend that is totally different, and then I just plop in my content blocks as I need them.